At one point in my life, I got a job working for an urban farmer. He had this company that grew salad greens inside of a crazy building that he made out of old shipping containers and some greenhouse parts. I was originally hired to develop an automated climate control system for him and just do some general IT stuff. But as sometimes happens with these kind of jobs, I ended up sort of doing a little bit of everything. Some things I was already pretty good at, like graphic design and electrical wiring, but some things I really didn't know much about at all before I started the job, like fixing gas lines or installing heat pumps or 2x4 framing, or shoveling compost. Now, speaking of compost, this farm had a huge compost pile, and so after I got my job there, I more or less just stopped composting at home. Instead, I'd toss everything into a 5 gallon bucket and I'd drive it with me to work a couple times a week. These buckets, man, they got absolutely disgusting. They'd be caked with all sorts of partially decomposed food and dripping with that anaerobic slime, and so I'd pressure wash them out every couple weeks. Now, I hated doing this because it sucks, and so I'd put it off for a long time, which just made it worse. Now, for those of you who've never pressure washed a 5 gallon bucket before, basically, you hold the bucket against the ground with your left foot and you sort of roll it back and forth while you spray the sides with the pressure washer. This blasts all the junk and sludge off the sides of the bucket, bounces it off the bottom of the bucket, and ejects it out onto your right leg. It's great. And so, I got to wondering if there was a way to build a machine that washed buckets. Preferably in a way that would get them clean without getting you covered in all that freshly dislodged filth. I couldn't find any sort of off the shelf machine that did this, so I toyed around with a few different designs in my sketchbook. And to be honest, maybe it would have just stayed in the sketchbook. But I happen to have a few friends who work for a local compost company that literally collects compost in 5 gallon buckets. And they kind of just really wanted me to build the thing, like very enthusiastically. Plus, I was bored and honestly just looking for something cool to do. And so, I did. And this is what I came up with. This little white box with a picture of a dog on it. You just put the bucket on top, step on the pedal, and a swirling vortex of high pressure water blasts all the filth out of the bucket and down a hose into the drain. The basic construction is super simple. It's just a bunch of EMT conduit that's bolted together using these corner brace things that are designed for building like awnings or tents or something out of EMT. Why EMT? Because that's the cheapest way I could find to buy metal tubing. And then the shell of the machine is just half-inch plywood from an old sign clamped to the conduit using P-clips going in alternate directions. This sort of suspends the plywood about a half an inch away from the tube frame, which does two things. One, it allows for ventilation without the need for any kind of like ugly grates or grills, and it also drains any water out that might get spilled into the box. The actual mechanical mechanism inside is also pretty simple. The heart of the machine is a 1700 psi electric pressure washer and a 120 volt solenoid valve which turns on and off the incoming water supply. I did this because buying a solenoid valve capable of switching the high pressure side of the pressure washer was like really expensive. So both the pressure washer and water are turned on and off at the same time by a double pole relay operated by the foot pedal. The relay and wiring connections are mounted inside this takeaway box from a Chinese restaurant, which makes a nice water-resistant enclosure. This all drives the actual cleaning mechanism, which is essentially the guts of a pressure washer attachment that's designed to clean cement. I just flipped it upside down. I called it the Pail Hound, which was sort of a joke that references like a band that's basically called the same thing, just spelled differently, and my beautiful friend drew the super cute logo. This is the only prototype. I didn't really develop any further iterations because the original design worked almost perfectly on the first try. In fact, it even looks almost identical to the drawing in the sketchbook, just minus a couple of theoretical additions, which I think is kind of funny. And kids, that's the story of how I became rich and famous by inventing a machine that washes buckets. Well, maybe not quite. In the end, the compost company which my excited friends worked for actually had no interest in buying the machine or the design rights to it, and a couple other prospective buyers of the intellectual property never went anywhere either. And I mean, I suppose that's understandable. It's pretty niche and probably has limited mass market saleability. But even still, I feel like there's a simple sort of magic in having an idea turn into a sketch and a sketch turn into a fully functional machine. You know, it's almost like sometimes the process is actually more fun than the end result. And I suppose there's always a bigger pile of compost somewhere.